They just said, you're no better than anybody else. So he says, oh, really? Watch. We'll get water out of this rock. He didn't mean to say we, not God. Rather, we, not you.
Yeah, you think Moses doesn't deserve what God gives.
Oh, no, he doesn't deserve it, but God was right. Because had he gotten away with that and gotten them into Israel, they would have worshipped him. That's why he's buried where no man can find him, so that he will never be worshipped.
He really is pro-Moses.
That's for sure.
Right. And pro-God, by the way. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you for joining us as we journey through the great book of Exodus. And thank you very much to the DW Plus crew for having the vision and generosity of spirit to make this Exodus seminar, produced at no small cost and substantial risk, freely available to all who are interested on YouTube. Perhaps you might consider a Daily Wire Plus subscription. It's a bastion of free speech, and we have great content there with much more to come. We journeyed to Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem to film a 4-part documentary series on Western civilization, and have additionally recorded specials on marriage, vision, the pitfalls and opportunities for adventure and masculinity, all of which are exclusively available there. These join many of the Beyond Order public lectures that made up my recent tour and my extensive back catalog, fully uncensored. Onward and upward. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased and disappointed to announce that this is the last episode of the Exodus seminar. Pleased because we are coming to an end, and by the looks of things, a successful end, and disappointed because it's been great fun and very deep and meaningful process, and so there's some sadness in it coming to an end. So, but having said that, we're going to continue our journey, and we'll begin with what we talked about yesterday. So let me catch everybody up about where we are in the seminar and also where the Israelites are. We're just finishing off Numbers, moving to Deuteronomy, and that's where we'll end. And we left the Israelites in the following condition. So the covenant of the second tablets has been established. We talked about that a little bit. The first set of commandments inscribed on stone looked like they were a bit harsh, or the Israelites couldn't live up to them. You know, you can interpret it one way or another. They were dashed, and the Israelites started to worship false idols. And the second covenant, or a new covenant, was reannounced with new tablets, perhaps a slightly less stringent set of requirements from the divine, and perhaps a bit more goodwill on the part of the Israelites. Remains to be seen. And that means the state of Israel has been established now. Nonetheless, the Israelites are still in the desert. Now, they've established a state, and they kind of got themselves together, so they're not complete slaves anymore, and they've set up a subsidiary structure that actually serves their purposes quite well. But that doesn't mean they're satisfied, and the text indicates that they start to murmur, which means to complain resentfully, essentially, and also that they engender within themselves something like arbitrary lust. So they get kind of hyper-consumer. That's a good way of thinking about it. They get greedy and impulsive. And maybe that's one of the temptations that falls prey once a successful state is established. In any case, God isn't very happy with that, and he threatens them with annihilation once again, and Moses intercedes on their behalf, and we have a reestablishment of something like the principle of subsidiarity, and God agrees that he's going to abide by his covenant, even though the people have deviated. And then that's complicated by the fact that, remember now, the Israelites are moving out to the Promised Land, right? So that's the uniting vision. That's the vision that's giving them hope, literally, and uniting them and preserving them from anxiety. And they send scouts out to Canaan, spies from each of the tribes, and they come back, and there's some disagreement about whether or not this movement forward is actually a good idea. And some people say, yeah, the land is as rich as God promised, and other people say, yeah, but the people who are going to be set against us are much more powerful than we thought, and this is far too dangerous. And so now there's a fractionation of vision within the land. And that's basically where we're at. And God, as a consequence of the faithlessness of the people, essentially announces to them that the people who are alive now will not see the promised land, that they're going to be wandering in the desert for longer than they thought, and that's because they've lost this integrity of guiding vision and are questioning the covenant, and that's essentially where we left off. And Jonathan, you were going to comment about God's comments in...
I mostly want to comment on structure in terms of literary structure, to notice what it is that's happening. And so if you look at the story in Genesis, from the fall to the flood, you have this fall from Edenic place. They go down the mountain. Because of the sins of Cain, they develop cities and civilization. That leads to monsters and giants, and then that leads to water, which is the flood and the end of the world. So that structure is a structure that is universal, right? You can think about it in terms of a story, in terms of time. You can think about it also in terms of a phenomenological description of how any identity sees themselves. And so the Greeks, they had the omphalos, right? They had the middle, they had the belly button of the world. And then they had strangers further and further from them. And the further you went, the stranger they were, until you got monsters and giants on the edge of the world. And then on the edge of that, you have the great ocean, which is like really the end of the world in that sense, okay? So now what we've got is Israel basically wants to go and back to Eden is the way to understand it. The promised land is an image of Eden. And so the structure of how they're going to go back to Eden will appear as backtracking the fall. And so they're coming up to the Jordan. There's a river. They have to do a river crossing, right? And when they finally do cross it, it'll really be even like the water's going to split. The Ark of the Covenant, like the Ark of Moses, is going to cross over the waters. And then what do you need on the other side? You need giants. It's like giants are there before you're able to get to Eden. So they're going to see giants, and then later they're going to defeat a first city, which is this image of the city, and that is how they kind of begin their entry into the promised land. So you can really see how beautifully structured the whole narrative is as they kind of go back. And this is something, this type of storytelling is there everywhere. If you look at Geoffrey of Monmouth, the first people that come to Britain, what do they have to do? They have to fight giants, and it's a universal mythological story of that which is, let's say, the world that was before us usually is made up of giants, and you have to conquer them in order to start up a new world. Whether it's like the Scandinavian Eddas have that same structure, the frost giants. It's just, I could go through all the myths.
Well, they're those giants are you could think about them as the underlying principles of the state that is now going to be conquered. Because when you encounter a people, you just don't encounter their soldiers. You encounter the whole landscape of the ideas that animate them. And those are giants. And sometimes, I often think Rome died of indigestion and you could say, well, it consumed so many giants that they went to war in the stomach of Rome and then tore it apart, right? They couldn't digest the culture, because the culture isn't just the fragmented individuals that make it up. There's these gigantic principles operating behind the scene.
And usually it's almost also the image of a remainder. It's not just the culture. It's like this culture that has become too heavy in its body, right? It's like an excess of body, you could say, a lack of head. That image you have of the giant that has a dwarf on his shoulders that's moving him around. That's the image. Like too much body, not enough mind left. And so it's,
All right, so I thought we'll talk about Numbers 15. There's a bit of a reference here to the idea of the fringe, and that's very relevant. So do all of you remember that famous, I believe it was a New Yorker cover, which was the world view of a New Yorker? Yes. And so there's New York, and then there's some streets laid out, 52nd Street, and then you can see New York, and then there's New York State, and then after that there's flyover country, basically, and then, the land of the monsters. And it was a real iconic cover. And the reason for that is it has exactly this structure. And the reason that our systems of apprehension have this structure is because even our visual perception has this structure. Mm-hmm. You point your eyes with the highest resolution part of your eye. That's the fovea. And then the way the visual system is structured is that it's very intense and high resolution right at the center, but that takes a lot of brain power. And then you have concentric rings that shade into each other around that center until finally about out here, you don't even see in color and you don't see shapes. You see vague shapes, and then it fades into blackness itself, or into non-being, really, beyond blackness. And so what that means is that even every aspect of an elementary perception has exactly the same structure. A sacred center that defines the unifying point of the perception that fades out into the fringes along the edges. And so
that's why what Jonathan says, as described so beautifully at the mythological level, is recapitulated, as we've discussed already, at the political level and at the anthropological level. Ultimately, we